At T-Mobile, we're declaring the end of data limits. Introducing T-Mobile One. One price, all unlimited for everyone. That's right. Get unlimited 4G LTE data on your smartphone on our network that was built to handle it. And get it at a price that won't break the bank. With 4 lines of unlimited LTE data for just $35 a line per month with AutoPay. Switch today.
Top 3% of data users greater than 26 gigabytes per month may see reduced speeds until next bill cycle. Video typically streams at 480p with qualifying credit discount via bill credit plus taxes and fees.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Parenting Aces radio show on Blog Talk Radio's Toughness Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and we are going to have another amazing conversation with John Falbo today. I'm so excited to have him back on the show, and every day I get excited to see what new stories John is sharing on his Facebook page, and I take notes and make sure I jot down the ones that I want to ask him about once I get him back on the show, and today's no different. So I'm not going to waste time talking about anything else. I'm just going to bring John on the line and let him start storytelling for you guys so that we can all benefit from this amazing guy's life experiences. John, thanks so much for doing the show again.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lisa. I'm ready to roll.
Awesome. Well, you've been sharing some really intriguing stuff on your Facebook page, and so I don't even know where to start, but maybe let's start with an Atlanta connection, if that's okay. One of the stories that you posted was about a player party that you played at that Patricia Jensen asked you to perform at, and I believe Luke was there. And the Atlanta connection, for my listeners who may not know this, there are a couple connections, actually. One, Patricia Jensen now lives in Atlanta and does the ball kids for the BB&T Atlanta Open every year. Whenever anybody needs ball kids trained and organized for any type of event here, they go to Patricia and she makes it happen, which is so cool. And her daughter, Rebecca, was actually my Alta team coach before I moved. And so I got to know Rebecca really well. And yeah, we've gotten to be friends, and she's awesome, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so that's the Atlanta connection. But I want you to talk about this party that you performed at that seemed to really make an impact on the people that were present. So I'm going to just let you jump right into that story.
Well, sure. And, you mentioned Rebecca being your coach, and I don't know how many people know this, but she won the NCAA championships in doubles when she was – I live in Lawrence, Kansas, at KU, about 6 blocks from the university, because that's where I was an All-American and played. But she came about 4 or 5 years later and won a doubles championship in the NCAAs. So she was an All-American here and an NCAA champion. And I watched she and Rachel, her twin, grow up, and I always knew they were going to be very, very good because they were watching Luke and Murph,
Exactly. I was going to say the doubles thing is in the genes, and for me, it was awesome having Rebecca as a coach because we're both lefties, and it's not often that I've had the opportunity to have a coach that was also a lefty and could teach me some lefty ways. So that was always really fun.
I didn't know you were a lefty too. That's cool. That's very cool. Yeah, and Pat has been. To give you an idea how long, you probably know this, but to give your listeners and the entire audience a chance to know how long she's been in the game, I remember being 12 years old, and Mrs. Jensen had this van, and it really was almost like a cargo van, if you can imagine that. And there was, the seating was, you may as well have had like a steel softball viewing bench in the back of it. There was no padding. There was no nothing. And Murph and I had just played in the National Indoors in Chicago. and we were riding back to Grand Rapids in this van, and it was like probably midnight, and Miss Jensen's up in the front. She's jamming the music, bumpity bump, 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 going 70 miles an hour in basically a steel-clad cargo van, right? And within days, we were headed to, McEnroe used to do an exhibition tour with Guillermo Vilas and the Argentinian great. And it was one of the most successful exhibition tours at that point in history in terms of finances and attendance and things like that. And so Ms. Jensen was always involved with the promotion of these kind of things. Luke would play beforehand, in an exhibition like with Patrick McEnroe or with some people who were local there. And we got to watch all of this. We got to go to the matches. We got to view. We got to help with the different intricacies of the preparation. And she's just been in the game. I don't know how many people know how long she's been in the game. I mean, she's 3 to 4 decades, 30 to 40 years in the game. And
for sure. And you lived with them for a bit, right? That was your connection?
Yeah, we lived together in Grand Rapids at what was called the Mid-American Tennis Academy. It was a fellow by the name of Don Dickinson who moved out to Tucson. He's at the El Conquistador, last I knew, in Tucson, and he ran what was called the Copper Bowl for the juniors. I believe turned into the Winter Nationals. Right. And so he went on eventually to the El Conquistador, ran their programs, and then ran the Copper Bowl, et cetera, et cetera. But before that, we were in Michigan with him. And in one room, it was Luke and myself, and then Murph came full-time about 6 months later. So to live there, Luke was my roommate for almost a year. And he was almost 16, and I was 12. And he taught me so much. He taught me how to string rackets. He taught me footwear thing. He taught me what to carry in my bag. He taught me so much because the guy worked incredibly hard every day. And every weekend, Mrs. Jensen would come up, and she'd sit in the room with us, and we'd talk, hey, what's it going to take? What's it going to take to go to the next level? What's it going to take, breaking the thing down? Like, hey, this is not really that complicated. You got to go out. You got to hit a ton of balls. You got to play tournaments. You got to compete hard. And most importantly, you got to want it. And on the weekends that she would come and then go back to Ludington, which is where they were from, I would actually go back with them and stay at their house. And their dad, Howard, I believe he played for the Giants, New York Giants, in football. And we would do some what people now would consider outlandish things. We'd go back for the weekend, and it would be snowing, and we'd be running 3-4 miles in the snow, and be going and doing. They had a court in their backyard, and we'd be doing all kinds of drills. We'd be doing all kinds of just constantly talking tennis, exercising. It was their life, and I learned that if I wanted to be good, it had to be my life too. It had to be a lifestyle. It wasn't like go hit some balls and get good. It was like immerse yourself in the lifestyle. And the thing I respect most about Pat and the whole family, they were never afraid to immerse themselves in the lifestyle. They are tennis people through and through. And if you know Rebecca like you do, you'll know she's tennis through and through. And it's in their blood, and I feel like it's in my blood too. So when you meet a kindred spirit like that, it's pretty hard not to respect them,
Absolutely. And I totally get what you're saying. I tease my husband that when I go to these college tennis matches, I feel like I'm with my people. And he laughs at me. But it's truly how, it's what you're saying, it's the kindred spirit. You're with people that get it, that love it the way you love it, that understand the level of commitment that it takes. And I think that's, it's crucial. And it's interesting, and I'd love to hear your commentary on this group of young professional players that we've got competing for the U.S. right now, and the fact that they are coming through as a group, much like the group you were part of, and how important that is to have that camaraderie.
Yeah, it's a great question, and what I was going to say before I address that too about I've been looking forward to for a month since we did our last show. I've been looking forward every day to talking with you for the simple reason that you just stated, because I know you love the game, I know I love the game, and we connect like that. And there's no substitute for that kind of enthusiasm,
Absolutely.
And as far as the group coming through just this past weekend, do you remember a player? She was top 10 in the world. Her name is Marianne Wardell.
Yes.
She works as I believe the title is a performance coach out in San Diego for the USTA now. But she went to Stanford. She was top 10 in the world on the women's pro tour. She was an amazing player. And she and I knew one another growing up. And we've reconnected on Facebook since, I guess the summertime. And she hits probably once or twice a week with a coach named Woody Blocker. Now, the backstory with Woody is, if you've seen a couple of my posts, I trained with Woody when I was 15, 16, and 17. I think within a 2-week span, he saw me beat 3 eventual world number ones. So he helped me. Yeah, he helped me enormously. He was there. He was in the front row when we won Kalamazoo. He contributed so much to me. To Marianne, if it's not for Woody, everyone gives Jose Higueras credit, which was deserved for Michael Chang's French Open win in 1989, and very deserved. But I'm here to tell you, if it's not for Woody Blocker, Michael Chang doesn't win the French Open in 1989, because from the time that Chang started working with Woody in, say, 1986 through that period, Michael made vast improvements. He won Kalamazoo in the 18s as a 16-year-old, and while he was with Woody. And Woody is just a tremendous tactician. He knows the game. He won the Orange Bowl himself in the era of Dick Stockton and Eddie Dibbs and Harold Solomon, right before the Borg era. And so he's been in the game forever. He knows the game. Now, the reason I bring him up is because he's worked with Taylor Fritz since Taylor Fritz was like 8 or 9 years old. And a lot of people don't promote Woody. Woody's his own man. He says what he thinks. He never holds back. He's not politically correct, but he's a gem of a man. He's a gem of a soul. And so Marianne, I hadn't talked to Woody in several years, and Marianne Wardell hooked us up on Facebook and also through text messaging. And I just talked to him over the weekend, and we were talking about Taylor Fritz. And we were talking about the very question you just asked about this crop coming through. And he made the comment, he said, he was like, look, it's not, you can never say that there will be another generation that's going to win almost 30 Grand Slam titles. You cannot say that. But what you can say is it's definitely the best crop that's come up in a long time. And so you've got them competing against one another, and you've got them kind of watching, everybody's watching what the other one's doing. Everybody's being pushed that way. And I don't really consider, I don't consider the guys that are 24 and beyond, I don't consider Jack Sock and these different guys a part of that group. I consider the guys from 16 to 20, 21, because the truth of the matter is, Sock might go on and he may win a Grand Slam or more than one. He's very capable and he's a tremendous player. But the fact of the matter, and it's tremendous, you take nothing away from the guy. He's worked his butt off and he's a great player. But by 24 years old, if you go back and look at Pete and you go back and look at Andre and you go back and look at Michael and Jim, all the guys, by 24, it wasn't a question that they were going to be in the Hall of Fame. You know, from their ages of 16, 17, 18 to 21, 22, 23, there were Grand Slams being won. There were world number ones. There were world champions being won, world championships. So I think I don't really include that kind of group. And Steve Johnson is another one, like tremendous college career, tremendous player, very, very skilled guys that are going to make a lot of money and are going to win a lot of matches. But as long as you don't categorize them with the greatest ever, then we're good, you know. And we're good because they're fantastic players. They've done really well. But they're in their mid-20s, mid to late 20s in some cases. So the group that's coming up that's breaking through, like with Taylor getting to the finals of Memphis and losing to Nishikori, you know, he's busted through. You look at the ascent of his ranking, and it tells you a lot if he stays healthy. And like Woody was saying, you never know. This is a crazy game, especially when you get to be a pro, because you got all kinds of people gnawing at you and pulling at you and whispering in your ear what's best, etc. Things hold reasonably true. I think you hit it on the money, Lisa. I think this group has as good a chance as any group I've seen to really make a mark, and that means winning Grand Slams.
Why do you think all of a sudden, after such a drought, and especially on the men's side, that this group of young people has been able to reach this level? What do you think happened?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of things. I think you've had guys like Woody in the trenches for 10 years, you know, literally like that nobody knew about. So it seems overnight with some of the guys. But you've had different coaches that are many times they're not part of the USTA. They're running their own operations. They're in the trenches. Nobody's really noticing them. They're putting a lot of free time in, you know, that they're not getting paid for. And that's kind of the overlooked ingredient is you have parents, coaches, you have these teams of people that are really doing thankless work for 8 to 10 years. Nobody really knows about it. They're contributing to the development of the child as well as the player. And I think that's what you're seeing. I think you're seeing a result of several years of work. And I think it sinks in. Any competitor, when you're hearing like McEnroe on TV saying how bad American tennis is, and the GM of player development is named Martin Blackman. Now Martin is an unbelievable competitor. We would have matches on the back courts at Bollettieri's, and he and Andre, myself, David Wheaton, we'd be going at it for 3 and 4 and 5 hours. He's an unbelievable competitor. He broke through even before Andre or I, junior-wise and pro-wise. You know, he qualified and won a first-round match in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Tour event when he was 15. So wow. He's a tremendous competitor. So if you think he's not sitting at home and he hears McEnroe or he hears somebody else arrogantly say, you know, U.S. tennis sucks or this and this and this, and you don't think that lights a fire under him, and then you think you have guys like Woody and different independent coaches that are hearing this and being flogged on a yearly basis, that how much better Europe is, and which factually they have dominated. That's a fact. But I think there's a resurgence not only in American tennis, but in the American spirit in general. I think you're seeing it in lots of different ways. I think this is part of it. I think you've got a group of 4, 5, 6 guys that have had strong parenting from at least one or both parents, which is essential. Because if you look at the great players, they had at least one very strong-willed parent. because you don't do this thing without.
What do you mean by
taking
that?
your lunch.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Because I we hear that, but at the same time we hear tennis parents are a pain in the ass and nobody wants to deal with us. So what do you mean?
Well, the best coaches, to me, understand that a strong-willed parent will back their child up at the same time as working with the coach. And when you take a parent like Mr. Agassi and you take a parent like Mr. Sampras was incredibly strong. This guy he was an engineer. He owned a Greek restaurant. He was an entrepreneur. He was soft-spoken, but he was unbelievably strong. Mr. and Mrs. Chang, incredibly strong-willed parents. Mrs. Courier, there every single match. And working. She couldn't hit the ball that great. She could feed Jim. She could toss balls. She was down to do whatever. Mrs. Jensen, incredibly strong. She and Howard, very strong backbone. And so you see some of the guys that are in their mid-20s now that are Americans, mid-20s, early 30s, and there's a lot of them are nice people. Some are not so nice people. But the strength is reasonable, but I don't know that it's the type that you can grow up with and be like, look, this guy's going to be in the world or one of the best in the world. Because when you get out there and you're performing, sometimes it's the loneliest feeling in the entire world, the loneliest. And if you don't know that you have someone who's so dear to you that's going to have your back no matter what, there's a breaking point for everybody mentally. And when you get out there, when you're Luke and you look over and you see Pat sitting there, Pat's not breaking for anybody. And that translates over. My dad, whenever I would look over and see my father, I would feel instant surge of energy. Whenever Andre would look up at his dad, he would feel instant surge of energy. Now, are they tough? Are they difficult? Yeah, they're difficult because they like to get stuff done. And you're not just going to sit around and go according to the crowd like lemmings if you want to get stuff done. So are they difficult and a pain in the ass? Yeah, I agree with what you said. But the upside is, look, when we're in difficult situations and stuff's on the line, we need people in back of us that are not only going to push us, but that are going to stand up for us and believe in us. And to answer your question, I think this crop, I think there's some very, you don't know about them right now. You will as these guys do better and better. But I think there are some very strong-willed personalities behind this younger crop of guys, if that answers your question.
Interesting. Yeah, it does. I think it's been fun to watch. I know a couple of the kids, not really well, but I know them and know the parents and have interviewed the parents, and I'll have to put my thinking cap on about what you said about the strong parents. I think that's a very interesting way to look at this and kind of debunks that whole thing of, parents stay out of the way if you want your kid to do well.
For instance, if I could give two examples, if you'll permit me.
Of course.
Uncle Tony with Rafael Nadal. Uncle Tony's a savage. If you know Uncle Tony, he was like one of the very best soccer players in Europe. He comes from, in terms of athletic lineage, this guy's a savage. He competed he was known as one of the most fierce competitors in Europe. And so, when Rafa's out there and he's thinking about giving up, or he's thinking about going soft and not playing every single point as hard as he can, he looks over and sees Uncle Tony is like, hey, that guy could have never hit a tennis ball in his life, excuse me, but he knows athletics. He knows what it takes to win. And it's not a tea party out there. It's one time when Andre and I were playing down at Nick's, he called us to the net, Bollettieri, and he said, look, guys, this is a street fight. You guys are whining and complaining about balls you're missing, or you don't feel good, or you don't, maybe you're not really feeling it today. If we were in a street fight, you'd be dead. Mm-hmm. And you don't have the sense of urgency that it takes right now to say, look, I'm hungry for every point, for every single ball, for every possession. And that takes a certain amount of toughness. And if you're looking at it like one of Pete's famous comments is, when I play the guy, I feel like he's trying to take food off my plate. And I feel I'm hungry, and you're trying to take my food. So what's going to be my natural response? It's going to be a bit primal, Like, look, let's get after it. If we got to grind, if it's got to be ugly, if we got to make an extra ball, if we got to come in when we're a little uncomfortable, whatever we got to do. But if it's a street fight out there, then it's definitely not a tea party. And I think with these strong-willed parents or coaches or brothers, or you have to get very raw out there at the highest level. And you're kind of naked, because when you get raw and you get kind of savage or primal, you're looking around, and a lot of people might be like, wow, that wasn't pretty. that was a little rough. That was a little too true for the moment. That wasn't like, happy-go-lucky. And you have to know that the people behind you are going to be like, look, we got your back. We believe in you. Do it how you need to do it. However tough you have to get, you get tough. And not just as a saying, like mentally tough or mental tough. No, you get down and you get dirty when you need to. And you scrap for every point. And that's really the beauty of the game. And if you had asked, well, why hasn't, kind of the implied question that you asked is, how come there hasn't been anybody really? And the answer is, the guys that have won Grand Slams and World Championships know how to get dirty with the best of them. They know how to get their hands dirty. I don't mean they know how to cheat. I mean they know how to get their hands dirty. They know how to really put the work in. And when stuff's on the line, they're not submitting at all. They're going every point. They're enduring, and they're playing. And the other example I was going to put forth was, I was down, I think it was 90, 91, might have been 92, 1992, and Jennifer Capriati lived at Saddlebrook pretty much since she was a mid-teen. They bought a house there. She trained there with Tommy Thompson and Alvaro Betancourt, and she trained every day there, sometimes harder than others. But this was when she was going through her, if you remember, she had a lull of a few years where it was 3 to 5 years where they weren't even sure she was going to play again. Now, if you were down there, you knew she was going to play again, because she'd come on the courts with her 2 dogs and her dad and her hitting partner. And then she'd go for a run. And sometimes they'd hit 10 minutes, and sometimes they'd hit an hour in 10 minutes. But I was just sitting at the fence watching after a workout, and they were working out. And, of course, her dad's there, and everybody gave her dad. I mean, they tried to bury her dad, if you remember. And he was a good Italian man. He was a strong-willed Italian man, but he was always good to her, and he always had her best interests at heart. And they tried to bury him and blame him for her difficulties. And that was a way to divert from maybe a couple of the agents. That was a way to divert from maybe a couple of the trainers and a couple of the people that really should have been looking out a little better. But in between, they would take a break. They would take breaks every probably 10, 15 minutes so she could get a drink. And he'd throw the balls, tennis balls, to the dogs, and he'd come over to the fence, and we'd talk a little bit. And I was like, this is really far from over. And he'd smile real big, and he'd be like, I know. He'd have his accent. I know Very, very far from over. It's just Jennifer needs to know it's very far from over. I know it's far from over. I know she can be the best in the world. I just have to be patient and let her come to realize it. And this is a guy that stuck with it for 10, 15, 20 years. And if you remember, when she came back, she was the only player, really, that could beat consistently Venus and or Serena, because she was so good from the ground, from her training with Rick Macy. So good from the ground. And he would, constantly, he was on the court every day. And when she looked over, with any less willed of a parent, she gives up, and she had plenty of money, so she just goes and rides off into the sunset. But every time she looked over at him, she knew he was thinking. She knew he believed in her. He might have been the only one at that point. I knew she could. I believed in her. But, he, in terms of in her mind, who the most important people were, he might have been the only one in her mind that truly believed in her. And so every time she'd look over, she'd be like, hey, this guy believes in me. I might be a little screwed up right now, but I know he thinks I can do it. And I know he wants me to do it. And I know he believes in me. And if anyone thinks that's not huge in terms of, her ascent back and her overcoming her difficulties, if he wasn't as strong-willed as he was, there's no way she comes back. And there's no way she's ever as good as she was.
It's such a interesting dilemma as a parent to know how much to push, when to step back, and we talked about this, one of our previous chats with you and your son and his chess playing, and that fine line that we all walk as the parent of this talented, hardworking, committed young person. And I'm not sure there's one answer to the question of, where's the line? How do you know when you're getting too close to it, or God forbid you're stepping over it? And I think it's something that all parents must struggle with, I can imagine.
Yeah, I agree with you. And several thoughts come to mind. Like if I'm a coach or I'm someone helping your child, you in particular, and I see what a good soul you are, and I see you're disturbed about something like, your son or daughter is not giving their best effort. I ask myself, well, are you beating them? Are you hitting them? Are you physically abusive to them? And the answer is, of course, no. And then I say, well, are you emotionally or psychologically abusive to them? And the answer is no. When I see a good soul, I have to be able to judge just as a human being, like, look, this person is not harming this child. Now, are they pushing them? Yeah, those definitions have changed over time. When my dad in the 1920s, if he stepped out of line like I see some children step out of line and tried to, run the household, he would have gotten swatted into next week. He would have literally gotten either punched or spanked. It wouldn't have been a spanking. It would have been a stern, whack. Mm-hmm. And so these definitions change over time. And to me, you got to be able to determine and differentiate. Look, is this parent harming? Are they physically or mentally in any way abusive? If they're not, pretty simple to determine. That's a pretty extreme thing to determine. If they're not, then it comes down to, okay, what level are you going to push? And I don't think any parent should ever feel bad about pushing, because we live in a society in many ways that encourages mediocrity. And I don't know any person that's content with mediocrity. I've never met a person that says, well, you know what, I just feel really good about half-assing it today. I don't. I don't think it's part of the. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's part of the human spirit or the human condition. I feel like we're built to achieve in some capacity.
I'm not sure I agree with you on that point, because I have seen people content with mediocrity. I hate to say that, but that's the case.
Well, but so. I don't know, Lisa. I don't know if they're really content in their heart of hearts. You know, I mean, maybe they appear content, but in their heart of hearts, everybody has something that they want to achieve. It might be on a really small level. It might be on a grandiose level. But it's still something they want to achieve, even if it's getting up and having a certain amount of food that day, or like the species doesn't survive, I don't think, if we're not made up to move forward. I think we perish if we're not instinctively made up to move forward. And I know what you mean. You see a lot of lethargy, especially at this point. So I'm with you on that. You see, I feel like, 7 out of 10 people I pass on a daily basis quite possibly may be medicated in some way. Because the lethargy is unbelievable. It's like some people are walking around in a cloud. I know what you mean, but I don't think that's their natural state. If you really get down to it. And I mean, you were talking to me before the podcast. You've been traveling a lot. You've been doing this. You promoted the tennis. You pushed the tennis. You're in your own way, just like me in my own way. You're a go-getter. You want to get some stuff done. You don't just wake up and be like, hey, I think I want to watch like 10 soap operas in a row or 10 evening movie channel movies in a row. You're wanting to get stuff done, and because you're awake and you're alive, and I feel like in our natural state, I feel like that's how we are. So I don't know.
Let me ask you. Can I ask you a question? I want to interrupt because and I hate to interrupt you because I like to hear you talk. But you keep talking about the tough parent and the tough competitor, and having that drive to and that hunger. And it's interesting to me that in the last, maybe 5-10 years, we've had this prevalence of professionals, books, websites about training mental toughness. And it seems to me that was either something you had or you didn't have when I was coming up, and, later when you were coming up. I mean, the kids that were tough mentally were tough mentally. I mean, they just were. And the kids that weren't out there trying to be tough mentally. They were finding something where their personality would help them succeed. What are your thoughts on the books, the professionals, the websites?
Well, I spent probably almost 2 years down in Orlando and training with a guy named Pat Etcheberry. He's trained people across the sports spectrum. And at that time, he was part of a group called LGE, which was Jim Lair, which is one of those supposed mental toughness guys, Jack Groppel, which I'm still not sure what he does, and he's some way affiliated with, I don't really know. And then Pat. Now, mind you, when I was down there, Pat and I would talk at least 2 or 3 times a week in his office, because I would see it was split in 2 halves. So Pat had one half, which was the gym, the workout area, and the massage rooms, all the physicality. And then the other half was the supposed mental room with administrative staff and basically more of a sedentary type of half of a building. And I would go into Pat every time we would talk, a couple times a week, 2 or 3 times a week, and say, look, I see people coming in the gym all the time. Like they're paying money to come. So the income side of the operation is in the physical training. It's in the gym. They're coming to you because they know you're sincere. They know you're working. They know that they already have their heart in place and their spirit, and they want to get better, and you're going to help them do that. Now, that's for real. That's tangible. That's why they pay. I look on the other side of the thing, and I'm like, I see straggler here, straggler there walking in. It's completely uninspired. At that time, I think Jim was putting out a book called Stress for Success. And I remember him being in the gym one day, and I'm like, were you drunk when you titled that? Like, had you had a few too many toddies? Because you're going to go to, like, corporate America and ask them to stress more and tell them they're going to be successful, and you're selling, quote-unquote, mental toughness. Now, Jim he started out at Bolletari's. And you don't want to know some of the things when he'd come near the court with Andre or a few of the other guys when we'd be practicing, and he'd start to like delve into this quote unquote mental toughness, which he basically helped coin and really helped start selling, and a lot of people sell it now. And in my view, Lisa, it's a fraud. It's a fraudulent idea. I'm not saying Jim's a fraud. I'm saying the idea of mental toughness and that whole deal, of course that half of the building in LGE would be uninspired. When you're on one side and you're watching Jim Harbaugh bench press almost 400 pounds, and you're watching Charles Woodson come in and squat 500-600 pounds, that's real stuff. That's tangible stuff. If you've ever had a squat bar on your back with any kind of weight on it, you're do or die at that point. If you don't have heart and spirit and mental toughness, you're going down. So somebody whispering in your ear from the sideline, well, we need to be mentally tough now. Go through your routine. Go through this. Woodson would have looked at him like, would you get the hell away from me? I got 600 pounds on my back. And when he's playing in a game and he's got guys coming trying to take his head off, if he's got a guy at the sideline saying, well, now, Charles, you got to be mentally tough today. You got to go over your routine. He'd be looking at him like, look, I'm going to get decapitated if I listen to you. So I hope that answers your question. I've always felt that the whole idea was fraudulent. Because and you have guys like Tony Robbins that are actually, as he's aged, he's gotten a lot more fundamentally sound with his common sense ideas. You have the guy that I wrote about several times and will write about again, Father Joe in New York. He wasn't promoting ever mental toughness. If he's working with Muhammad Ali and he says, now, Muhammad, we really need you to concentrate on the couple of routines we worked on today. He's like, hey, this guy's he's about to kill me. He'll kill me if he can. So I'm not thinking about mental toughness. I'm thinking about seeing the outcomes that I want. I'm thinking about getting in touch with my real motivation, with why I'm doing what I'm doing, with all the hard work I've put in, with why I love what I love, with who's dear to me, and I play for myself, I play for them. What's my inspiration? What's my motivation? And how can I see the outcomes that I want? Now, that's real stuff. This other stuff.
But where did you develop that stuff? Where did you develop that stuff? Just through life experience? Did you develop that stuff because you had a coach that guided you that way, or a parent that guided you that way? I think that's the question, because not every kid has that instinctually.
Yeah, I agree. And you hit on a couple of ways. Maybe it's a parent, a strong-willed parent. Maybe it's a coach. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's someone in the family. But the idea at least has to be introduced of, look, this is a very rugged pursuit that you're going after, be it athletics or anything you want to really achieve. Doesn't matter if it's scholastic, athletic, academic, it doesn't matter. If it's rugged and it takes a lot of work and a lot of patience, yeah, it helps if you have at least one person that can say, look, this is going to take an enormous amount of effort here. Let's get honest about this. To see every day when you wake up and every night before you go to bed, you're going to have to see what you want your body to look like, how fit you want to be, how you can gain victory, how you can gain an edge, what you do well. And you have to sit with yourself and be very honest. And it really helps if you have one or two people that can sit and talk to you, not with some pie in the sky, fantasy-filled, monk in a chateau-like structure on the top of the Alps, not something like this, but someone who can talk common sense to you and say, look, how much work did you do today? Have you seen what you want? Are you motivated enough? Are you ready to go to work again? Are you going to be able to dig yourself from this fatigue and really come up and say, hey, okay, I got to get the work done today? That kind of common sense, that kind of heart, that kind of spirit. And that doesn't take, a 400-page book telling me about all the synapses in the brain and all these different things. Because at the end of the day, I don't really know if I can control those synapses. I don't really know if I can control all the electrical. No one's ever figured out the human body fully. They can map they can do the genome and they can do the DNA all they want. But in my view, we're divine creations. So no one really knows why the violin makes such beautiful music. But when we go to the symphony, we don't sit there and analyze it and write a 400-page book about it. We sit and we say, oh, my God, that's beautiful. And so I think some of it comes from the individual. Like you say, there has to be a certain amount of it. I think some of it comes from the important people in their life, not being afraid to say, hey, look, it's okay to be honest. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to not really know, which way you want to go here in terms of, is my forehand stronger? Is my backhand stronger? Am I fast enough? It's okay to have doubt, but let's honestly work through that, and then let's get to some solutions where we can, kind of get a roadmap to go after the thing.
Well, that kind of brings us back full circle to Patricia Jensen. And I asked you about the party that you performed in at the beginning of our hour together, and we never got to the party. So can you tell that story? Because I love the story.
Sure. And I think I had just performed. And I should back up. The main reason I have a website is just to list this broad spectrum of life experiences, because if you listen to one conversation with you and I, it's like there's a lot of pieces that are to the puzzle, and if you don't have all the pieces, you don't know what fits where. Point in my life, one of the businesses I had was I was promoting a record, a hip-hop single, and a music video. And it was doing very well. The single ended up selling full count, like half price, wholesale, and full price. The majority sold full price, but we were looking at in excess of 100,000 copies sold. So
wow.
I mean, 100,000 copies for me is different than 100,000 copies for Tupac. Because there was one year where, because Tupac made 30 cents a record because he had an atrocious deal. I was doing it myself. So if I sold a cassette tape, which is what it was back then, or a little later a CD, but mostly cassette tapes, and that cassette tape cost me total marketing, materials, packaging, everything, $1.50, and I sell it for a value price of like $10. Well, my margin is so much better than a person that's signed to a record label. So at that point in my life, that was one of the businesses that we were doing, and I had just come from Philadelphia. They had a big tour event. I performed in the Spectrum a couple nights before for I think it was maybe 5,000 people in the Spectrum where the 76ers, the NBA team used to play before they got their new arena. And so we come down to Florida, and we're sitting in Pat's hotel room, and we're just talking about what's going on with me, what's going on with her, what's going on with the boys. Because at that point, I think the boys were coming off the French Open win, and they had their own clothing line with Adidas. And so we're talking, and she's like, hey, there's a player party tonight. Do you want to perform? And I was tired. But it was supposed to be all tennis people, so I was like, hey, that would be great, But I did say to her, I said, this is not this is not a tame kind of thing here. This could get a little, you could get a little rowdy, because it's not like there's no quiet please from the umpire, and there's no nothing. It's a free for all pretty much. So you better get a good seat away from everybody so you can see things, but you don't want to be right in the fray because, you never know what can happen. So she said she was okay with it, and we went in and we performed, and I both rap and DJ, so I was doing that, and I had a hype man there to help me with the crowd, and he traveled with me pretty much everywhere I went to perform. And Malavia was in the front row. You had Lisa Raymond was a great doubles player. She was there, and her partner, what was her name? Samantha. She won Australian girl. She won a ton of Grand Slams. Luke was there. It was really a who's who of not only tennis players, but there were NBA guys there. There were NFL guys there. And as those guys go, usually a very beautiful flock of women follows. So, and then you had models. You had all kinds of different celebrity type people. And everybody was just kind of sitting around having their hors d'oeuvres, and we got on stage, and we started bumping to the music. And they were first surprised it was me. And then once we got everybody going over the next 15 or 20 minutes, the place went absolutely berserk. So much so that they had to lock down the entire place after about an hour and a half to 2 minutes. They had to lock it down.
You rowdy tennis players.
Well, because people were coming in off the street because they heard the music, and it was a Hard Rock Cafe overlooking the water. So they were hearing the music, and then they'd look in, and everybody had their hands up, and everybody was dancing, and the atmosphere was electric. So they were coming in off the street saying, hey, I'm going to come into the party. So what started as 50 to 75 people in a capacity, Hard Rock capacity, was maybe 200, maybe 250. I mean, we had 500-600 people up in there. And wow. It was wall to wall. And if you've ever been to a show like that, after midnight, people have some drinks. They're feeling good with the music. Sometimes clothes start flying. Sometimes all kinds of different things happen. So Cass over there, I think Pat might have left a little early because I don't know if she stayed the entire time. She had a great time, but I'm not sure if she made it until like 5, 6 in the morning. And we just kept going. And now at about 1:30 we stopped because I thought I had given them enough. I thought everybody would, get something to eat, go their separate ways. And we're backstage, and I'm literally like getting ready to change my dress and go out and enjoy the people at the party. And Luke comes back. And I was kind of stunned, and he's fired up, and he's got a beautiful girl with him. I would call it half clothed. She did have a dress on and some heels, but there wasn't much to the dress, and he was fired up. And he was like, you have to continue. Like, listen out there. And they were like either saying come back, or they were chanting my last name, or he was like, listen. I said, man, I'm exhausted. We just got here from Philadelphia. We've been on stage for almost 3 hours. What do you want? What do you want from me? And he got right up in my face, and he was like, suck it up, man. He was like, what do you think? Like, you think I'm not tired? You think we're not on the road all the time? He's like, what are you doing? Why are you being soft? Suck it up. And that was typical Luke. I mean, it was typical Luke. And I thought about it for like 15 seconds, and I was like, well, I'm not going to turn the guy down because he's damn near 200 pounds. He's evidently really enjoying himself. And I don't have I'd rather just go out and perform, especially if that's what everybody wants. So I wasn't going to get into it with him like, hey, leave me alone, get out of here, whatever. Partly, I think, not so much because I was scared, because I knew he was telling the truth. I knew that as an entertainer or a performer, when you have something good going, you don't just stop. You know, you give as much as you can give, and whatever your return is, it is, but you give, and then the returns kind of work themselves out. So I knew he was speaking the truth, and that's, I think, more than being scared. I mean, his eyes were big. He had Cookie Monster eyes. You know, he was like, hey, get out there. We need you out there. We need for the party to go on. But I was like, I think more than being scared at all, I was just like, hey, he's telling the truth. And he's saying, look, you know, suck it up, fight through the fatigue, just like in a match. Dig down, have some heart, get out here. And so once I made up my mind, I think we went until 4 or 5 in the morning at least. And
wow,
everybody, yeah, they had a great time. I would see people at the tournament because I'd walk around Lipton with Pat and a few other people and check out some different matches and of who I wanted to see. And I'd see people 2 and 3 days later, and they'd be like, great party, man. A couple people would be like, hey, can you come to the next stop? Can you do another party at the next? Yeah. Can you come over to Europe and do a couple parties over there? And so I think part of my inspiration for posting that was, and it kind of draws us full circle, like you say, you know, Pat instilled in the boys and the girls, in the family, she instilled this attitude of, look, whatever it takes, let's get it done. If this is what you want, then let's work for it, let's earn it, and let's get it done. And I was just thinking about, you know, because we have a reunion coming up here at KU, and the Jensens are coming in, and several other people are coming in. And it's in the next couple weeks, you know, and I was thinking about them. I was thinking about seeing them. I was thinking about all these different experiences. And I said, you know what? That experience really boiled down why she would take us in that cargo van, why she would be involved with the McEnroe and Vilas matches, why she would get Luke and Murph. If for some reason they didn't have the money at the time, or if for some reason the schedule wasn't right, she found a way. She found a way. Now, she's tough. She doesn't need a book to be tough. She's got heart. She's got spirit. She's just tough. She would find ways. Those boys, Luke and Murphy, and Rachel and Rebecca, none of them do what they've done without Pat, because Pat's got that spirit. And so that's what was kind of motivating me and inspiring me to tell that story. Because it would have been a great show at 1:30 in the morning, but at 5 in the morning, it was a fantastic show. And I don't get there, I don't get there unless he comes back and he's like, suck it up, man, go.
Right.
You know, like, compete, let's go. He pushed me, he's strong-willed, you know, like we're talking about. He pushed me.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for it. I didn't particularly like it at the time. It was a little uncomfortable. But at 5 a.m., I sure liked it, Lisa.
I'll bet.
It had been, you know, it had been a great show. And we don't get that level of performance if he doesn't push me.
Well, I think let's end on that note, because I think that's the message to take away from this conversation is you don't get to the level without some pushing. And in most cases, it's It's the parents that are behind the pushing, and it's okay to be that parent as long as it's done with love. So,
well said. Well said. Well said. Pushing and abuse are two different things, and pushing with love, I think, is the most healthy of things.
For sure. Well, John, thanks so much for doing the show again, and for my listeners, you guys have to know we're going to continue these conversations with John because he's just got so many incredible stories, and there's no way to get to them all in an hour, but we're getting there slowly but surely. So thanks for tuning in. John, thank you for your time and your generous spirit and your willingness to share your experiences, good and bad, positive and negative, and help us all do better out there.
Oh, Lisa, I love it. And our hour seems like 5 minutes to me.
To me as well, except that we're pre-recording this one and it's dinner time in Atlanta, so I'm getting ready to go satisfy my appetite that way. So thank you again, and I look forward to next month with you. And to my listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week on Parenting Aces.
Thank you, Lisa.
At T-Mobile, we're declaring the end of data limits. Introducing T-Mobile One. One price, all unlimited for everyone. That's right. Get unlimited 4G LTE data on your smartphone on our network that was built to handle it. And get it at a price that won't break the bank. With 4 lines of unlimited LTE data for just $35 a line per month with AutoPay. Switch today.
Top 3% of data users greater than 26 gigabytes per month may see reduced speeds until next bill cycle. Video typically streams at 480p with qualifying credit discount via bill credit plus taxes and fees.